Back. Come on, you can put your jaw up again now and, you know, wipe up that spilt tea after seeing those two old codgers try and break into that glass cabinet holding the Magna Carta. Some breaking news there before we broke ourselves with two Just Stop Oil protesters aged 82 and 85 exercising their right to protest against one of the nation's finest historical assets. Anyway, we're still joined by Matthew Larser, who's been with us the whole show.
Absolutely.
And Will Geddes, a.k.a. Ken Wiggins. That's the name my mum accidentally called him one morning, and it's stuck forever. That is your sort of James Bond-esque name.
AKA.
Although not as slick, is it? A Ken Wiggins.
Ken Wiggins. I don't know. I think it's a good cover name, actually.
Do
Yes.
you?
I think
Because
nobody would. Yeah, they'd be like Ken Wiggins. Let him through.
I reckon that.
Nobody would make it up, would you?
No one
you
can.
wouldn't choose it.
It's more likely that 85-year-old Just Stop Oil protesters called Ken Wiggins than you.
Well, there looks like a couple of Wiggins there, doesn't it?
They were a couple of Wiggins. I like that. I'm going to start using that. A neologism for a fool, a Wiggins.
Something's gone crazy in the last half hour.
It really has. You get towards the end of the 3-hour show and you start going a bit balmy.
For the mad half hour.
Right, now, talking about the mad half hour, what is going on with these student protests that have started off over in America? And I remember sitting here one day and presenting the show and looking up at the screen. It's 10 o'clock in the morning here and more like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning over in California. And the scenes at UCLA, you actually had the journalists dressed up like they were in a war zone. Hard hat, bomb-proof vests, the lot of it, and the riot police going in. It was absolute carnage. And yet things aren't as they seem, are they, Mr. Wiggins?
No, they're certainly not. They certainly are not, Ms. Phillips. The problem that you have, and this has been going on since the dawn of time, it's a very common tactic that is used by various different governments in various different parts of the world for various different agendas. And that is to use agitators and what are the best way of putting it? Orchestrators, professional orchestrators, who will go into crowds, go into groups, and they will stir up sentiment, and they will embed themselves sometimes within those groups. And more likely, you're going to see this in protests on the street, where it's much easier to infiltrate. And certainly in the instances of many of these pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas protests, there is very, very definitive evidence of Iran using Iran-sympathetic agents to actually infiltrate and to stir up. So in the same way as you have a football crowd who will start a chant, someone has to start that chant. So you have individuals that are professional agitators that will come in amongst it. They will finance individuals. They'll use various different means to encourage a crowd to potentially become more volatile and more vocal, and particularly to move down particular sort of speech terms, whether it be Allah Akbar, whether it be down with the police, defund the police, all sorts of things.
From the river to the sea, genocide.
So it's not just some very hot-headed, very emotive individuals that may see the plight of the Palestinians and want to support it. You will always have that very sort of malevolent element that will be within the crowd. And counter-terrorism is working very, very carefully right now in monitoring who these specific individuals are.
But we knew, didn't we, a long time ago? I remember Robin Simcox, who is the government's lead advisor on extremism, saying about these pro-Palestinian marches we've been having through the capital, let alone now these campus protests, which are being copied very often by American students here, not the British ones. But he came out and said, you know, there's a lot of pretty grim groups who are part of corralling, choreographing, coordinating these marches. Not saying everybody on these marches are part of those groups, but they don't realise that they're actually doing the bidding of terrorist organisations.
Correct.
Why on earth, when we know that, has nothing been done about this?
Yeah, so again, there's a big question mark over Rishi right now about prescribing the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, who we know, and I've been up against in various parts of the world, particularly in the Middle East, who are a very, very nasty group that are doing the bidding for, obviously, the dictators of Iran right now. Now, they have their sympathisers, they have their networks, but Rishi has not prescribed them as a terrorist group, and he needs to. And certainly the authorities need that to be able to act off the back of that intelligence, to be able to make arrests, to be able to run interceptions, to do all sorts of standard tradecraft that you do to run against insurgency.
I mean, interesting, actually, it was one of the heads of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, I understand, who was targeted, him and his cohort, in that embassy in Syria by the Israelis, which led us all to sort of sit on the edge of our seats as Iran poured down missiles on the Iron Dome and were, frankly, unsuccessful. But, yeah, Israel taking taking the chance to take that guy out.
Absolutely, and as they should. I mean, when I was in Iraq, for example, they were running sorties across the border to basically mess things up, stir things up, and this is very much their standard playbook. So what they're looking to do is sort of build up the fervour within the pro-Palestine supporters. And as you rightly say, there are probably many people there with all the best intentions who have emotive reasons to be there. But when you have agitators that will stir up a particular group and they will get them to deny certain elements, and I'm not saying that the other protesters are stupid necessarily, but when you have someone who puts together very rational reasoning, or what may seem to be rational, pragmatic reasoning, to say do not denounce Hamas, for example, because if you denounce Hamas, then it becomes a house of cards in terms of your support of Palestine. There are different ways that they will manipulate it and socially engineer it to their advantage, which then, unfortunately, sort of spreads like wildfire.
I mean, reportedly, the leader of Hamas has basically been chatting away with Iran, saying, oh, we've done it, lads, haven't we? We're winning the PR game.
Yeah.
And essentially, this is all part of the border playbook, that those Iranian-instigated attacks on October the 7th. Iran, of course, give weapons to resource, help fund Hamas, train them. They were basically intended to create what we've got now. Hamas don't care about the slaughter of civilians. Hamas want the slaughter of civilians. They want those sorts of optics. They don't care about their own people. They want those sorts of optics, so the world turns against Israel, and it does seem to be working.
And it does. And the one thing that you touched on there, which is a really relevant part, is the financing. This is one thing that Iran has been very smart about doing. And again, you know, many other governments, including maybe ours, you know, historically, have been involved in financing certain agitators. So if you give people the finance, and this falls as a playbook across various different types of organisations, even Islamic State. And in Syria, for example, you know, the Al-Nusra Front, which then became Al-Qaeda, then draw-offs to Islamic State. A lot of those individuals that were recruited from, say, the Free Syrian Army in Syria were financed to go and join. And then Al-Nusra Front, they were financed from there to join Al-Qaeda. So they were told you're going to get better weapons, you're going to get money for your family, you're going to get all these sort of things. And even when we go to the recent terrorist attack in Russia, the individuals that carried out that attack at the theatre, those individuals they disclosed that they were going to get paid $5,000 each for carrying out their attack. So it's not about necessarily an agenda. It's not particularly about an ideology. It's not necessarily about a reasoning that they want to pursue. Quite often, in many cases, it comes down to the base element of money.
Yeah, I mean, we were sending a lot of money, us, the UN, other Western entities, over to Hamas-controlled Palestine. I don't think it ended up in the pockets of the Palestinian people. They're one of the richest terrorist organisations on planet Earth.
Well, I think more international relief has gone to Palestine than virtually any other country in the world.
And actually, Hamas, I think, have almost as much in their pockets as the entire GDP of Gaza.
Oh, absolutely. So the number of billionaires at the hierarchy of Hamas is astounding.
Let's be real about this. Now, Security Minister Tom Tugendhat, a man I greatly admire and respect, a good friend of mine, because he's very commonsensical when it comes to these things. He's definitely a man in the right job. Has turned around and said, given a huge number of these activists on UK campuses who are setting up these pro-Palestine encampments, they're actually Americans, why on earth aren't we revoking their student visas and packing them off on the next flight home?
I totally agree. And Tom always speaks reason in my book as well. I'm a fan. The same applies in America, and certainly in terms of any of these individuals that have come over on student visas, they are guests in our country. You don't walk into someone else's house when you're invited there to cause disruption, to upset, to alarm, or even to intimidate. So I'm with you entirely. And I don't think it's draconian to think, you know, if you're a guest in this country, you're on a visa. If you don't behave yourself, off you go.
You're disrupting education that people pay tens of thousands of pounds for. Bog off back home. Now, Rishi Sunak's response to all of this has been to say, don't make Gaza protest cancer culture war. I hate that. These things aren't a culture war. Do you know what the culture war is, Mr. Sunak? The same as the culture war surrounding feeding kids puberty blockers and making them, you know, take their genitals off surgically. It's the voice of common sense against the radical left trying to destroy Western society. It's not a culture war. It is people saying, this is ridiculous, it must stop. What on earth is he playing at? I've said from the beginning what Sunak needed to do, and at one point he did pop up behind a podium and condemn the hate marches, as Suella Braverman would call them. And you thought to yourself, finally, he's going to get tough on this. France, Germany already banned these protests, and yet he's done nothing. And now it seems to me that he's almost ring-fencing these ne'er-do-well protesters at university campuses and saying, nothing to see here, let them get on with it.
Yeah, you see, I'm all for protest. I'm all for free speech, and a lot of people believe I'm not. I genuinely think people... This is one of the things that we fought for this country, to give people the opportunity to be able to speak their mind, but it doesn't mean that everybody has to curtail to that opinion. So if you have the protesters, they want to do their thing, great, go do your thing, but do not disrupt the rest of that location or that institution. Allow it to continue to do its own thing. If people want to listen to it, it's like a spoiled child in the corner where the horrible petulant parent is turning around and saying, oh, we've got to listen to little Timmy because little Timmy's having a tantrum. Well, no, we ignore Timmy and we crack on and get on with the rest of our day.
One thing I find quite disturbing, I think most people find this very disturbing, is the huge rise in more people saying, oh, well, it's a rise in anti-Semitism, you know, all these chants. First of all, it started off with jihad. Oh, no, that's about mental struggle. And now it's genocide. And then it's sort of from the river to the sea. Now it's intifada. If you look back historically, Nazism found its roots and developed very quickly in the far-left radicals of university campuses.
Absolutely.
People often forget the Z in Nazi stands for socialism. You've got this organisation, the Socialist Workers' Party, who seem to be a common denominator every time, you know, beardy weirdies and people with mad fringes pop up with placards trying to disrupt things. I don't think we should be taking what's happening very lightly, particularly if you see the context of the October the 7th attacks essentially being designed to try to turn the world against Israel, and the fact that that is now taking root.
But I mean, but let's step back for a second, and I think this is the problem. Nobody has perspective, a broader perspective. Nobody's looking at this from a macro point of view. They're looking at it from a micro point of view. And you take something like the attacks on October the 7th, which everyone seems to have forgotten about. Everyone seems to have forgotten about all the hostages that are still being held. We're hearing about Hamas trying to agree that there's a peace deal with themselves, because nobody else has agreed with it. And until such time as those hostages have returned, and I've been involved in the recovery of hostages, you know, nothing is agreed until hostages are going to be safely returned. If you're using them as leverage, they'll continue to use them as leverage. I think the biggest problem is, and this is the really sad part, I think a vast majority of those hostages are probably dead already anyway.
I think you're right.
So there are very, very few, and they're bartering off. And I even had one kidnap case which I was negotiating, where there was a negotiation against a person that was dead, which is why you have proofs of life. But that doesn't mean you still don't want to get the body back for the family for a respectful burial. But the problem with Hamas right now is people forgetting the fact that you take the analogy of someone coming into your house, attacking your family and kidnapping your children. What would you do? I know I would want to decimate them and all their ancestors and future generations if someone came into my house to do that. And I don't think that's unreasonable. That's not me talking tough. That's, I think anybody would feel the same.
Anyone, that's the human instinct. Now, final word to you, Matthew, because we've got to take a break very shortly. I mean, look, I would like to say that I stand for the principles of freedom of speech, but when it comes to people who are connected to terrorist organisations, who are disrupting education, who are essentially sort of creating a wave of hatred and going against British foreign interests and the interests of the West at large, I have no truck with these protests.
Absolutely, and I think, as we've seen with the Eurovision, the sort of slightly pathetic virtue signalling which we're seeing over Eurovision this weekend, people on the left need to be a little step back and think, what actually are you even passively supporting? Who are you endorsing? What is the wider context? Absolutely, you know, it's one thing to be wanting a ceasefire, it's one thing to be wanting more humanitarian aid to get into Gaza, it's another thing to be getting mixed up, in some pretty unpleasant bedfellows. So watch and think, watch who you're with and think about what you're saying.
If only they did. Sadly, though, they largely scroll through TikTok and just get brainwashed.